Give me one. Okay, lovely. Thank you so much for joining us, Pedestrian Group. I'll get you all to introduce yourselves in a second. I just want to start by acknowledging Gadigal land that I'm recording this yarn from, and acknowledge all of the beautiful country that you're all joining from. I think we've got quite a few different places across the continent today. So acknowledge where you're all coming from, and beautiful country holding us, especially any mob in the room with us today. So I thought to kick off, for the mob who are with us from Our Truth, Our Way, we've got Blair and Victory at the moment, and we might get a few more jump on throughout the yarn. Blair and Victory, do you just want to write in the chat so that everyone can read a bit about you, just your name, your mob, and where you're zooming in from? And as you're doing that, I might hand over to whoever wants to speak from Pedestrian Group first. And if you want to hand the baton along, just introduce yourself, your position at PG, and then hand on to the next person, and we can start asking you some questions once we've heard a bit about you.
No worries. I can go first. So I am,
Well, it's fine. I'm sure they can hear you through
yeah,
here. Yeah.
So my name is Sarah Michael. I'm the publisher at Pedestrian Group. So I work across all the brands, but you're probably a lot more interested in hearing from the other 4 people in this room, because they are the people you'll actually be pitching to. So I hand over to Josie.
This is my chair, like starts escaping. The floor is like slanted or something. I just went run away. I'm Josie, head of editorial at Pedestrian TV, not to be confused with Pedestrian Group, which is the group that has all the other sites, specifically just Pedestrian TV. So, or yellow logo, black legs. That's what I'm doing. So House of Pop Culture, a lot of news, entertainment, social issues, politics, anything that young Aussies give a shit about, basically.
Cool. We're not going in a circle. I think you're up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Asha. I'm the editor of Gizmodo, but also representing Kotaku, which is our gaming site, as well as Lifehacker, which is basically our own version of Google, we like to call it. But Gizmodo is technology focused. So we've got tech, gaming, and life hacks. A little bit of a mix there, but we kind of cover anything under that quite big umbrella when you start to think about it.
I'm Brad. I head up Vice here in Australia, head of editorial, and we have a New Zealand team as well. I've been here for like 18 months. Vice is pretty, if you know, you know. It's like underground drug, sex, culture, news, but we try to, our rule for news coverage is generally to come from the perspective or the voices of people rather than politics. And yeah, that's it.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the head of editorial at Refinery 29, which is a publication that is aimed at young women and underrepresented people across Australia. So we launched in Australia 2 years ago, in just a couple of weeks. It'll be exactly 2 years. But it's been around for a long time in the US and the UK and France.
Just lost your.
What we do, unlike a lot of people wouldn't otherwise hear, but also.
Oh, funny. Okay, I'll go this way. So I don't know where you lost me, but I'll repeat the last sentence. So a lot of what we do, unlike traditional women's media, is to tell the stories that you're not otherwise seeing, and also passing the microphone to underrepresented groups, whether that's ethnicity, gender, sexuality, occupation, to be able to hear those kind of untold perspectives.
Beautiful. Thanks, everybody. You've spoken a bit about it in your intros in terms of the sorts of content that your platforms publish. So it's good to just hear like what the differences are between you all. But I was wondering if you could go around, sort of hand the baton like you did just then, and just talk about specific story ideas that work well for your platform. Maybe some examples of the sorts of content that does really well on your platform. And then, yeah, why it would be, say, better suited for Vice or better suited for Refinery or better suited to Gizmodo as you're going along the line.
No worries. coverage. I might just, because I don't rep a specific brand, I'll just say that what I would keep in mind is that there's a real diversity of formats of content that, you know, you can pitch to us and that we freelance out. So it's not just a written article. We're looking a lot more at like TikToks and short form video, even long form video. And, you know, we'll still a lot of coverage like social, Instagram, carousel, that sort of thing. So yeah, just something to keep in mind for everything, that it's not just written articles, although we do like those too.
Yeah, beautiful. I'd love to ask a few follow-up questions about the cross-platform publishing afterwards. So yeah, go maybe talk with, I'm looking at Asha and Brad at the moment, go through and talk about some examples of yarns that do really well on your platforms.
Yeah, so I'll start with Gizmodo, which is the tech and pop culture. So we kind of look at it as anything nerdy will have a place. We kind of want to create a safe space for people that are into the things that might make them fall into that, you know, not mainstream kind of space. So we love comic books. We love creators of very niche things, especially those based locally. So, but that also comes to people that are entrepreneurs or budding innovators, and those that want to be the next kind of startup coming out of this land. That's what we would love to promote. We want to promote local stories to a global kind of audience. Even though we do reach just mostly Australia, it's kind of putting us on the map as the place where tech happens as well. It's not just out of Silicon Valley, or not just out of, you know, other places in where there's kind of those tech hubs. It does exist in Australia. For Kotaku, which is gaming, it's very similar as well. We do love covering indie developers. So those kind of small groups that are making games or want to make a game, as well as those participating in local esports competitions, or also those that want to kind of discuss issues that are happening within gaming. So they're good or bad, but conversations that need to be had that a lot of people don't really want to have. There's a space for that on Kotaku, and I think that's what we're proud of as well with that. And Lifehacker as well, we like to kind of showcase, in addition to the, you know, standard life hacks, we also like to showcase things that need to be talked about again, but more from so just say you hear something on let's just use Married at First Sight as an example. If you hear a term that's being used, or if there's a theme that's brought up, we want to kind of explain that to people in a way that doesn't lock them out of understanding. We want to create an environment where allies are able to learn, as well as, you know, to kind of expand their own learning, but in a way that matches up with things that are going on in the rest of the world as well. I don't know if I explained that too well, but it's just, as well as initiatives that are going on around the country, we like to highlight where you can find all of those things around the country, not just Sydney, not just Melbourne, but everywhere. We're a lot more dispersed around the country than a lot of people seem to think in the media, and we like to draw attention to that as well. Hope that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I should have prepared something for Lifehacker rather than just coming and talking on their behalf, but I hope that somewhat makes sense, that it's life hacks, but it's also drawing attention to things that people should know about, and we like to pride ourselves on that as well. Yeah, sorry.
Cool. So don't apologize.
I'll pass it on to you. You're right now.
Nothing to be sorry about. So Vice, the like slug line I use, which is it sounds kind of cringe, is cultural newswire. So if you think about like a lot of the outlets in the world really, but specific to Australia, there's a pitch there of being a newswire, keeping people up to date on the news, politics, what's happening. And the Vice approach here, at least in Australia and New Zealand, is very much to think about that, but from a culture perspective, which means we want to be telling people about the places, foods, music, news that they probably don't know about yet, or maybe don't understand fully yet, and immerse them in it. A very recent example of that is our culture writer, Julie, wrote a big feature on this musician called Menashe, I don't know if anyone's heard of him. I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't, because he hasn't released any music. He's only performed live, and he like does these rogue underground concerts that are getting him a lot of attention. And our approach there is to be like, not just we want to cover it, but also do like a feature, do like be the first there, and also do the best version of it before they even blow up. That's from like a music perspective. And then like news, as I mentioned, any sort of like current affairs or longer investigative pieces, what we're looking for is that people first perspective. I think there's plenty of outlets across the media that focus on what politicians have to say and how they feel, and what rich and powerful people have to say and how they feel. And I don't really care. So our approach is very much talking to the people that are impacted and affected, and framing things from that perspective. I have a general rule for my team, which kind of coasts over to pitches as well, which is if I'm 30 years old, age reveal, and if I have, if they like pitch a college thing, musician, whatever, and I've heard of it, it's not a good sign. I'm very conscious of, I am fast aging out of the Vice demographic. So I like to tell myself that having that awareness is good. But yeah, that's kind of the spark notes of it. Anything weird, wild, wonderful, crazy, putting yourself in the story. Again, kind of the easiest way to describe it, but it's also kind of cringe, is gonzo. That's kind of like floated around Vice for decades, but that's because it's true. I mean, the memes kind of hold up, that you can be like, I did acid and went to this event and here's what happened. Like, yes, that is very Vice, and that is why people like Vice. And we still do that too. Yeah. I think
Awesome. Let me know if you can't hear me again. But on Refinery 29, our main verticals are fashion and beauty, which you would expect, work and money, entertainment, wellness and sex, and of course culture. But I think the way we cover all of them is not so much reporting on the trends, like where this is happening, but also interrogating the trends, like who are they for, who are they excluding, who are they talking about, and who is missing in those conversations. Like, for example, obviously everyone heard of the Taylor Swift fiasco with finding tickets, etc. And obviously a lot of outlets were covering like how to get tickets or that kind of thing, like more straight coverage of news. And we commissioned an Indigenous writer who wrote about how she feels really conflicted about her love of Taylor Swift as a Black woman, because obviously she's had some problematic behavior in the past, but also like, is it okay to like someone who's semi-problematic? So like going just that one step further and talking about what people are already kind of thinking. Yeah, across all of our verticals. It's like, it's not just covering things and reporting on them, but also critiquing them where they deserve critique.
Okay, I'm next. Let me know if I freeze as well. So I'm kind of the opposite of the last two, in that Pedestrian does a lot of reporting of the trend, and I think what Pedestrian does is what you just said, of like, this is what's happening, but then we'll take it a step further and be like, okay, what's the next angle? Like, can we take aim at this? What does it mean for young people? Or, you know, this thing is all over TikTok. I remember one that we did was like, on Instagram, when it said, if you repost this, we'll plant a tree.
Oh, that's
and we were the first people that actually went, okay, so what is this and who's running this? And so we will report the trends, but then we'll dive a bit deeper as well. Obviously, we do heaps of entertainment, and entertainment's our biggest vertical, but we enjoy kind of all facets of entertainment. So yes, we cover a lot of maths, but we have a lot of fun, and let us do it. Kind of investigating maths, and hey, this moment was super racist, like last year when that guy was like, I'm not racist, but I've never dated an Asian woman, or don't date Asian women. And we were like, this is racist. And so we had a lot of fun, one of our writers, writing about that, interviewing the woman involved, the man involved, and just like kind of taking aim at that stuff. And then with news, which is probably our next biggest vertical, it's not just like that current affairs stuff, it's more social issues and shit Aussies care about is my kind of cringe tagline. And that has changed over the years. Like that, you know, there was a huge, when I first joined, it was all about marriage equality. Then there was a bit of a climate change trend and it moves really fast. And at the moment, I would say a lot of it is cost of living, renters' rights. We're doing a big video series at the moment about how cold people's houses are, which is going really well. So it's just things that directly affect young Australians. Like they're quite self-centered in that way, where they just want to know about that and what that means for them. So really interested to see lots of people's different perspectives and diving into like trending topics and taking them a little bit further or looking at a different perspective.
Beautiful. It's really clear. Thanks, everyone. One thing you mentioned is, yeah, that sort of cross-platform publishing that the platforms on Pedestrian Group offer. So I suppose an example that I saw was when you covered the Koori Mail newspapers carrying of the entire Lismore community during those floods. You know, I saw that produced across social media, and then as that really big article, there's a lot of video content that was really powerful. What stories lend themselves? How do you decide which stories will be commissioned to be that sort of cross-platform published yarn? And are you looking for the same reporter to produce it cross-platform, or do you normally partner them with a team when they do create, you know, a TikTok as well as a written article for a story?
Oh, who should go? I'll go first. So that story, that our whole coverage of Lismore actually just quickly was like a very good example of kind of like Vice does news, where we sent two people, our video producer and our senior reporter, and with the instruction of like talk to people, do not talk to the army or the police or the politicians or whatever. And we just found so much stuff and people very angry, kind of rightfully, and wanting to talk. On the topic of like how we think about the distribution, I'd say it's really based on, we get the pitch, if you can be concise and clear, even in just the headline in what you're trying to say and who's going to be saying it. A stronger headline will get you very far. It's one of the hardest things to do. People think it's simple, but I would just stress, like, don't skip over that. It's very important, even in a pitch process. And then I would sit down. Usually we'd probably like throw the pitch in the Slack with my whole team, and we'd kind of start to dissect it and say, oh, this is opportunity. They might say, the pitch might be like, oh, we've got like 1,000 words, and I think I can get it to you next week. And then we might commission that and then actually say, depending on if they've had to travel or whatever, contact them after the fact a week later and say, hey, this was great. Do you want to do a video as well? We'll pay you for it. It's rare on first time that we would do both, a story, like a written story and a video. But second, third, fourth, we definitely favor having like a tight circle of freelancers who we trust and know can deliver. So like on that second, third, fourth, it becomes more of an open discussion around, oh, you have access to this person. Okay, well, if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, we can get someone there with you to film, or maybe you can film if you just like prop up your iPhone. It doesn't have to be super good quality. We can edit it on our end, and then also you can write the article. That also translates into costs. Like you do get paid for multiple pieces. It's not a like, oh, we'll just slice this up. So that's positive as well. Yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yes. I just even had a follow-up there just on saying that, you know, you'll get a pitch and you'll have a look at whether it lends itself to being distributed across your different platforms. Are you looking for pitches to actually outline from the beginning that they think it lends itself, or is that something you'll probably have that conversation with them?
It definitely doesn't hurt. It's not like, even if we disagree, you know, that's fine. The article or other part of it could still get cleared, because there's other factors that come in, like what does our kind of load of videos coming in from the past couple of weeks look like? Do we budge things across to get, is this a breaking news story? Do we need to get this out quickly? Like that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you're confident in your ability to both film and write, then definitely come forward with that confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Did anyone else have anything else to add just about how which stories lend themselves to being published cross-platform, or how you tell a story differently when it's, you know, in article form and in TikTok? Like, what are the sort of the main things you're looking to differentiate?
Yeah, I'll go. We've just kind of recently, we have a video producer as well, and I was always jealous of Brad having one, and that's why we hired one. This was our first kind of foray into having a dedicated person working on this social video kind of strategy. And it's been, so in that way, we're not as far along as Brad in this process of, like, we haven't even had a freelancer yet kind of come and pitch a vertical video, social video, pitch that, record it, and have that posted yet. Like, that's how new it kind of all is. But the reason we got Izzy on board is we noticed specifically with news and like social issues, our readers and our audience, I guess readers is not the right word here, our audience weren't wanting to read like a longer form story. They were more interested in seeing it unfold in a video, in a carousel, like that kind of really accessible, relatable, which is bite-sized, informative way of presenting it. So that's why we kind of moved into that space. So that's kind of every morning when we look at the news, we're like, okay, will people want enough where they'll sit and read a 3 to 5 minute article, or do they just want this presented visually and in a way that's really digestible for them? So that's how we kind of decide. And like Brad, like super open to people going, hey, I think this will work as a TikTok, because ultimately we'll like look at it and we'll think, yeah, actually it does. And often we'll flip flop with the topics and angles in our morning meeting and go, should that be a carousel? Should we write the whole thing? Should Izzy just like do it as a vid? She'll do it as a vid, and then we're like, wow, that went well. Let's now flip that and extend it into an article. So things can live not only on different platforms, but across like 3, 4 even.
With I'll jump in to kind of follow with that. With Gizmodo and Kotaku, we're also attached to the news cycle, but it's very, very niche, right? It's gaming or it's tech. But we still have a place on Gizmodo, on the website, for those long form kind of pieces that are from an interview, or mini features, even maxi features, proper features. But there is still that kind of appetite from our audience to read that stuff, because something that's quick, a news, a reveal, an unboxing, that lives on TikTok. But for that kind of more important, the more important message that you want to give out, there's still such an appetite to read that on site. And that's something that's across those 3 sites that I've been talking about as well, if that helps. I know it's a bit different to what the other 2 were saying, but, and of course we're also starting our journey on TikTok as well. That's not as set in stone just yet. We're still kind of trying to find our feet there, but while that's happening, there's still a strong appetite on site for people to tell their stories.
I think I agree with pretty much everything everyone said. The only thing that I'll add, because probably we're the only publication that covers things like fashion and beauty, which are so much more visual. So if you, you know, obviously, like, would you rather read a 2,000 word article about how to achieve a certain makeup look, or just watch someone do it in a minute, you know? So I think some things just lend themselves to a more visual format. So we always try to lean on, obviously, photography and video there. Same thing for fashion as well. So where we can show, we'd rather show rather than tell.
I just remembered one more thing. Rallies, protests, any sort of like live happening event across the country is, I think, like a great opportunity for people trying to get into media in general. And we're constantly looking for people who either want to write from the scene or film. And again, we can edit on our end. So it's as simple as being like, hey, I'm Brad, I'm here at X today, and there's 600 people also here. Take some shots of the crowd, do another bit to camera saying, oh, so-and-so just said X, or this just happened, more shots of crowd. And that's it, you know? And I think, like, by way of being alive in the kind of social media, internet, everyone is capable of that. Even if you at first like, I don't know if I want to be on camera, which is totally fine. But yeah, that's another, I think, really big opportunity for people trying to get started.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a lot of good tips you've already brought up in terms of, yeah, narrowing down the story you might pitch to any of your platforms. But I suppose for anyone who's sitting back and just being like, I just don't know where to start when it comes to finding a yarn, where do you get story inspo from? Like, what do you read and watch? And I know, Brad, you said, you know, if you've heard about it, it's not a good idea. Where do you find those ideas that you haven't heard about? Like, what is your news gathering techniques that you use?
It feels like a cop out, but it's like from talking to people,
Yeah.
like from going to, from a vice point of view, from like going to parties, from like trying to stay in touch with any sort of scene, from noticing when any sort of scene is popping up, from saying yes to stuff, like to people saying you want to go see this band or you want to do this thing. It can lead to great stories. And I'd also say that conversations, increasingly, I think like a lot of media companies are looking for stories, they always have really, that can kind of be summed up as like what you would talk about at a bar, but then turned into like a more formal, interesting, stylized thing. Because chances are, if you're talking to your mates about it, then more people care. If you could convince, you know, 2 people that this is important or cool, then there's probably at least 20,000 who agree, at least. So just it's a weird muscle to get going, and it takes time. I'm still working on it, that you constantly will think of ideas and not realize it's an idea, and then a month goes by and suddenly it's in the New Yorker, and you're like, that was me, like that was my original idea. So just making a habit of making notes of thoughts and conversations is really good.
I
Yeah.
think like, so go.
I used to work in women's magazines, and we would do a features meeting every month. And I noticed that it was the stories that if, you know, someone pitched, oh, I'm hearing a lot about squirting and I don't know how to squirt. I was thinking an article about how to squirt might be good. And then if 6 people are like, oh my God, I would read that, then that got on the list for the next issue of the magazine. It was anything that promoted conversation within the group who were young women. If they all started talking about it, and were like, oh, my friend, I have one of my friends, she like randomly squirted, whatever it was, like, bang, that would be in the featured list for the next issue. It was anything that really resonated. And I've brought that with me, even though it's different, it's not just a women's title, it's young Aussies, but my team is young Aussies, and then, you know, we've got people from different backgrounds. So it's quite an interesting snapshot each morning. But if it's something that 3 of them, like Brad said, if like 2 people like talking about a thing, it's like that thing of 3's a trend. If 3 people go, oh yeah, I heard about that show, or I thought that when I was watching Mouse last night. That to me is like, that's a story. I remember our old boss, Chris, being like, someone would say, oh, I saw a weird thing today. And you're like, that's the story. Like Brad said, sometimes it just takes that step back to realize other people might be interested and want to read about it as well. And like an old writer of ours, she used to say the internet is her diary, because she'd just say something out loud and then I'd be like, you know, that's a story. And she'd be like, okay. And she'd just turn around and write it. It's like, yeah, life should be your inspiration, whether it's what you're watching, what your friends are talking about, what your friends are worried about. You know, what are you losing sleep over? Turn around, write it down on your phone, and the next morning you might be like, hey, that's the story, that thing that's making me super anxious, because maybe it's making other people super anxious.
How that translates to technology is, so I just use an iPhone, and then I'll do something in front of a friend, my partner, my mom, whatever, and I'll do something and then they'll go, oh, what did you do? And it's not until then that I realize, hang on, that could be a yarn, that could be a TikTok, because if I just assume that it's normal behavior from everybody, but if someone doesn't know how to do that hack that then makes their phone life easier, but then you turn that into content and all of a sudden people are like, oh, great, I didn't realize that was something you could do. So that then something that makes people's life easier is what really works for us as well. And it's those moments of, hang on, I am, as someone super interested in that particular area, I am the expert in that area. Why don't I share what I know? And I think that that's a good rule of thumb for us when we're kind of having a content dry spell or the news is a bit dry. It's what do we do that someone else can gain from doing?
And I also think not being afraid to have actually a counterpoint and like a completely opposite view of what everyone's talking about. And I think sometimes those pieces can be stronger because I think most of us like want to validate, like, am I the only person who's thinking this? And so you'll Google that weird thought that you have. And then when you see that someone else had that weird thought, like that can be really powerful as well. And like, so if there is a trend and you already feel like, oh, everyone's kind of already covered it, or I'm like, you can always kind of like flip it on its head. And I think that's another way to, find ideas.
Yeah, I think probably like the common thread is that and I think it actually is great for everyone on this call because it makes pitching a lot easier than if you were to pitch to a like capital N news organization, where we're actually a lot more interested in a pitch that's about you or something that you and all your friends are talking about, or something that is happening in your community. Or, I'm just thinking of like some of the examples just to show you, I guess, how that thought process turned into a story. Like on Pedestrian, Izzy, who's our video producer, it's like everyone's talking about how freezing their houses are and how terrible insulation is in, most houses across Australia, particularly in these months of winter. And so she's done a cold homes series where she goes to various people's share houses and apartments and takes a literal thermometer and they measure, and it's kind of, that was the genesis of that. Or Ali on Refinery 29, I remember she wrote that great piece about how there was all this kind of internet chat about how terrible the contraceptive pill was, and she had a counterpoint which was like, well, I actually think it's really exclusionary and annoying and shaming people who might need to be on the pill, or so I think it really is, it's like if you're reading something and you're pissed off about it, that could potentially be a pitch. Or if you're just sitting there going like, oh my goodness, like this thing is really annoying me or really upsetting me, or like all my friends are like really heavily debating a story. And I think that particularly for the participants of this program, we can help if you've got those sorts of ideas that you're not quite sure how that might then become an article or might become a TikTok or might become something like that. Like we're happy for you to bring that raw kind of idea bubble, and then we can kind of help workshop. Because I think honestly that's the hardest thing for us, is just sourcing what is interesting and what's going on. So having people with different perspectives or different ideas and coming to us with that, that's really helpful. So yeah, as I said, it probably is almost easier than pitching for other news organizations. It's just, what is on your mind today? Cool. All right, let's see if we can turn it into a story.
I just remembered as well, one more thing that is like, when you're kind of building out your career and pitching, there's like, everything we've talked about is kind of like idea first pitching, which is what you'll do the most. But then there's also this component of like who you are and what you want to be known for, which is a lot harder to figure out and nail. But like the questions to ask yourself about, again, like what do I know and who do I know that no one else does? And how does that transform? So like, and it can start real small. So from a personal perspective, in like another life, I wrote a lot about drugs, not in a like taking drugs way, but in a like pharmaceutical and like medical way. And a lot of that writing as well kind of came with the wave of the legalization of medical cannabis in like 2014 or 15. That started because I had a neighbor growing up who they were like in their 40s, and their daughter had really bad epilepsy. And she started to kind of like be a bit more lucid, be a bit better. And I was just in a conversation with my neighbors, and they were like, yeah, like we're trying medical cannabis. And then I wrote that first story. then suddenly I'm talking to the dudes who like make it on the black market for the girl. Then suddenly you're talking to other people who can't get it legally, even though they've tried. Then suddenly you're talking to people who can't afford it. Like it happens so quickly as soon as you figure out that you can like, get your foot in the door. It's just about like really thinking, okay, well, who am I going to talk to that no one else does? And you'd be surprised, like everyone has really interesting stories. Like just go to a bar with someone, give them, and then you'll immediately find out everyone has really interesting stories to tell. Or give them a microphone. That's the other trick too. Then they'll tell you everything.
Like having well-respected sources in an article might win you a walk lead, but winning the audience will have real people, I think and people that live it every day. I think that's kind of the biggest thing to remember as well. You might not have access yet to the CEO of a company, but you have access to someone who actually gets affected by something, and that's more powerful.
Yeah, those are all really good tips. I mean, you've already covered so much of what makes a good pitch, and I think it's really important for this group as well. And just, I mean, even when I was starting out, to just have that offer to workshop pitches, to know that they don't have to be perfect. But that being said, are there just some key things that you're looking for? I know, Brad, you mentioned a good headline, but just like a couple of the key elements you are looking for when you get that first contact, when you get that first story pitch come your way.
Please do not send me 800 words. It could be amazing. It very well might be, but when I see like a huge email, it's just like, yeah, it's like, oh, I've got to read this. I've got to like engage. And you're really kind of like, you're really doubling down on, I believe in my work here, which is good. But often I'd say like the tighter you can make the point you're going to make and who you're going to talk to, the better. Because like ultimately like media outside of like legacy media companies, they don't employ like freelance contributor editors as full-timers anymore. So I think, and you should take that to not just Pedestrian Group, like anyone you pitch to in your career, like it's probably going to someone who is managing their own team or dealing with their own job or whatever. So have that perspective and think, well, they're gonna be busy, and they don't even really need to even open the email or however it's sent through. So how do I really grab them like straight away?
On that point as well, usually there is kind of a team or at least one or two writers, right? So if it's something that writer can write already, such as a press release or something that's so very obvious, it's going to be hard to justify spending a freelance budget, which is on something that the team is probably already going to do. So thinking outside the square or something a bit bigger than just small is also helpful.
I think the other thing is like not being afraid to put yourself in it, particularly I think for those of us who cover like identity and culture, and saying, this is why I'm the best person to write this story. It's because I have that lived experience, right? Like I have ADHD, I just came out, like whatever your lived experiences can actually be really valuable. So yeah, normally like in a school essay or whatever you wouldn't, but I think for this, it's like really safe to, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. We just add like, look at how the website or title that you're pitching to, how they tell a story. So what Pedestrian does really well is like the combo of headline, image, and social copy. We managed to get basis of the point of the story across in that. We don't need 800 words. You haven't read it yet. The story's already been sold, usually, if we do it well. So use that as inspiration, like try to be concise. Don't send the 800 words, because like Brad said, people have a million things. Don't even want to look at my inbox. It's a disgrace. I don't even want to talk about it. It's like flooded with things. So like the more succinct and just grabby you can be, that's what we do every day. So that's what you should also try and aspire to do as someone that's contributing to the site. And like, oh my God, rule of thumb, never be like, hey Josie, you've got this great pitch for Junkie. Oh my God, you've lost me. Like, I don't know who you're pitching to. Even if you are sending out a bunch or you're sending it to different titles, that's fine. That's what happens when you're freelancing. Just make sure you haven't written the competitor title in the email to the other person, because that makes egomaniac editors just like pass you over immediately. Small thing, but a big thing. be a tip for me.
It's all about that kind of impression.
Yeah,
as
I've
well.
always been like, you know, I was at Dolly, so I hated anyone from Girlfriend. I was at Clio, so I hated anyone from Cosmo. I'm a real like rivals person. Like, yeah, you lose me if you put the rival in the email.
That's awesome. Thanks, everyone. Look, I have one more question, but I'll just remind Victoria and Blair, if you've got a question, pop your little emoji hand up or chuck it in the chat. This one is actually a question Blair brought up last week, which I think is really important just to get your perspective on, or just your understanding of how it works. What protections do you have in place for particularly young mob and people who come from different diverse backgrounds when it comes to having their work published on your platforms? How do you protect them from bullying and racism in the comments?
It's a really good question. And I think one that Rachel, when you and Brad caught up initially, we had sort of talked about. It's really difficult in the same way that like most news organisations, due to resource cuts, etc., no longer have someone to edit freelancer copy, so everyone's busy. It's very rare to have someone who's dedicated to moderating stories full time. What we do, what I do think is really important is, you know, we have a sixth sense for when a story is particularly spicy or spiky, or, you know, we've all worked on the internet long enough to know how trolls work and like what's going to get them fired up. So it would be about, and yeah, particularly for people in this program, like we wouldn't want them to be publishing something really personal and then hold back or be fearful that they're going to get ripped to shreds. We can't control the internet and how we can't stop it, unfortunately, but I think we probably just have to have a conversation ahead of time around, you know, if there are any concerns, and try and put those mechanisms in place to, at least for the first couple of hours when the story goes live, see see what the comments are like. And if they get too unruly, just turn them off, to be honest. Like, we love to give the audience a chance to have a productive discussion. We don't want to stop all comments on a trans story, for example, because it's going to get hatred. Like, we want to also have space for, you know, the positive comments, but sometimes there's just a practical reality of people are getting too nasty, and it's just not worth it. So that would kind of be the process that we follow, I think, unless if anyone had anything else to
I
add.
would just say if like guidelines for social media in general, or if anything is like downright abusive, racist, sexist, homophobic, like we delete those. So that's not promoting conversation, that's like automatic delete. We don't delete comments where it's like, hey pedestrian, I'm sick of reading about Brad Pitt, like don't write this. Last night we had some comments on a story. We don't delete things that just kind of don't like are disagreeing with us. We delete things that are abusive. So if there were, if the, you know, 20 comments were positive and there's one like awful comment, we're not going to turn comments off. We'll just delete that awful comment and let the positive one shine through. But like you said, because people get served things, you know, we clock off at whatever time, but people are getting served the article all night. You can't be online all night. So if things are out of hand, then it's, yeah, comments all the time, because it's impossible to just keep on top of it.
Even though Sarah said we don't have time to look at social media all the time, when there is a story, you do look at it. And you do put your attention to that. It's just, it can't be also the story about 5 things to watch on Apple TV. Like, it's very, your time is very deliberately spent on certain ones.
Yeah.
And there's
we're about to get kicked out of this room, but if there were any other questions, like, happy to, if you want to send anything else over email, we can reply. And yeah, definitely if there is a story you want to pitch but you're worried about the potential backlash, like, we can also workshop that as part of the pitch. Like, it's, we as I said, we all have a sixth sense for like what's gonna pop off. So we can help you kind of prepare yourself and come up with a bit of a plan.
Advice, thanks. And yeah, we'll follow up if there's any other questions. We'll just flick them over email. I'll let you get out of the room. But yeah, big thanks for making the time. Really appreciate it.
lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. My name's Tula. I'm Gomori. I work with Rach alongside. And yeah, super keen to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. Just wanted to basically ask like your team, what are your roles? Like, I don't know, give us a little bit of a yarn about you.
Sure. So you might all be aware that we had a big flood in Lismore about 18 months ago. Up until that point, I was like one of the journalists here at the Koori Mail who would fill in for the editor. The editor never came back after the flood, so last man standing, that's how I'm here. But I have worked in media for about 30 years as a journalist, so I'm not Aboriginal. I come from Ballarat, down in Victoria, but I've and worked in all types of media over the years, but started at the Koori Mail I think I've done 15 years with the Koori Mail actually. And we're a small team here based in Lismore. We've got, in our editorial, we've got Darren, who some of you saw before, who's our sports editor. Then we have our Lena, who's pretty much taken on the role that I had as a reporter. Then we had Kath as a paginator. But a lot of our stuff comes in from correspondence from around the country. So we process a lot of stories and photos here in the Lismore office, which then go out to go out in our publication. We also have our general manager, our business manager, you know, subscriptions and our computer guys here based in Lismore. So it's a small team, but it's an effective team. We're looking to expand it. Anyone want to come to Lismore? We got no houses or anything, but.
Oh, thank you so much. And what stories do you like to publish? Like,
okay, what we love to publish is good, positive stories about what's happening with First Nations people around the country. Saying that, we're not shy of dealing with negative subjects, and in fact, you know, we've dealt with a number of subjects over the years, whether it be you know, young Aboriginal people in detention centres being treated badly, or deaths in custody, whatever. We deal with all those stories, but these days what we're trying to do is turn the Koori Mail into have a little bit more of a magazine-y format, if you know what I mean. So not like your traditional newspaper, which is just bad news after bad news quite often, because let's face it, there's a lot to celebrate and a lot to you know, a lot of good positive stories out there, and we like to run stories which are informative for people. So we cover health, education, you know, business, and we run lots of feature articles and lots of picture spreads. Picture spreads are a real key for our paper. When I first started, Kirsty Parker, I don't know if anybody knows Kirsty Parker. She was the head of the Congress there for a while. Kirsty used to pick up the paper at the end and just go through it, and she'd be going, "Oh, I just love it. So many beautiful black faces," you know, and I got that from her. That's been my key driver as the editor too, trying to get as many photos of mob from around the place in the paper, because let's face it, you know, people can cut it out, put it on Granny's fridge. So that's sort of what we're about.
Deadly. And like, what tips do you have for finding a story to write about? Like, what do you read, watch, or where do you get story inspiration from?
Okay, well, geez, that can come from simply walking down the street. And we have one correspondent named Alf Wilson in Townsville. Alf can walk down the street and come back with 4 stories. Like literally, he can, you know, he can see somebody at a truck stop, and the next thing he's writing about their truck and how they got into the trucking industry, because he goes up and he talks to people. Other stories come in via media releases, you know, people wanting us to know some news, and then we look at those media releases and we see whether or not we could expand on them. Word of mouth. I mean, we do take AAP copy. So we don't necessarily have to be sitting in inquests or sitting in coronial inquiries or whatever. We know that there's fully qualified journos out there covering those stories. We pay a fee to have those stories come in. And look, AAP is pretty good in covering Indigenous affairs. Their reporters are really onto it, so we don't have to do much work with their stuff. But we always look at a story and see how we can take it, if we can take it another step. Add a little bit more on, bring in some more voices, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander voices into the story. So that's myriad of ways we get our stories.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And what makes a good, strong story pitch, like, to your platform? Like, are there key elements of a good pitch?
Look, have you ever told somebody a story and they're looking blankly at you? Like they don't really get it? That's a shit story. Don't even worry about it. When you start telling somebody a story and they're like, they want to hear the next thing, that's a good story. It's all. Think about what's going to be interesting when you're talking to your friends or your mum or whatever. That's a story. We're no different. Just because we want to call it, sort of newspaper writing or whatever, we're telling stories. So it's difficult to say what's a good story or a bad story. Some people love reading, sort of in-depth negative sort of stories about murder inquests and all that. And sure, that's covering courts and all that sort of thing. That's one level of reporting, but just human interest stories, we love them. Whether or not it's the young woman who just sheared her 100th sheep, for example. I think we put her on the front page recently, or page 3. Whether or not it's our last newspaper had a fella walking on a high wire, and it was in reference to an Aboriginal guy 100 years ago who travelled the world as a high wire expert, and now they're doing a show here in Lismore to commemorate him. Now that was a local story that we were able to tap into here. Nobody else is going to get it, and nobody else is probably going to run it either. So we put out as many of those First Nations stories as we can.
Yeah. And are you commissioning any stories at the moment? Like, are there any topics in particular that you're keen for people to cover, or is it just coming with what they're writing, like spin up and down?
The way, because all media releases come into the editor's desk, if I see something from, say, Western Australia, and I think that it could be of interest to our paper, I'll shoot that through to our Western Australian correspondent and say, here, check this out. And they will, or they will get in touch with me and say, hey, Coin, we've got such and such happening next weekend. I'll say, yeah, go for it. Or look, we did that last month. Don't worry about it. So it's just it's constant conversation between myself and correspondents. But our correspondents, most of them have been doing it long enough that they just ring me up and tell me what's coming a lot of the time. So, but for anybody new, I guess it's just keeping your eyes and ears open within your own community, within your own, what's happening, what's happening sort of in your own neighborhood. Because you may think that, oh, everybody knows about this, but they don't. So where are you from, Tallulah?
I'm in Sydney. Yeah.
So you're in Sydney. Yeah. Now, funnily enough, we actually haven't got a permanent correspondent in Sydney. You would think we have. It's the biggest city in the country, but I think it's because we can get there so easily ourselves. We jump on a plane, we're down in Sydney in no time. So we cover a lot of Sydney stuff ourselves. But if you're in Sydney and say, I don't know, you're out at NAIDOC events or whatever, and you want to pitch to me and say, hey, listen, Darren, I'm going off to this event tonight. Would you like a little report on it? I'll go, yeah, sure, no worries. And we pay all our correspondents. For a lot of our correspondents take both photos and will write a story. Some just take the photos. So it's just the conversation of, where they are, what's happening, and whether or not we want it. But look, no idea is a bad idea. It just maybe that we don't need a particular angle at the time or a particular story, but we're fairly open to, because we trust our correspondents to be the eyes and ears of where they are. And I guess, well, we've been going for 30 years, so it obviously works.
Yeah. And with this, like, what is the average story length for an article? Like, do you have average lengths? Like, what styles as well do you publish? First person, hard news reporting,
Sure.
third person?
So average news story is around about 500 to 600 words. What we would say is more a feature style article is around about, well, it can be 1,000 to about 1,500 words. It also depends on when we're putting together a package. We're looking at, okay, if it's just going to be on one page, for example, a 500-600 word story with a photo is going to take up about half the page. If you wanted to have that story, so you could take out a whole page with, say, half a dozen photos from an event with that 500 word story to tell what's going on. If you're doing a double page spread, we're looking about, what do you reckon, 12 to 15 photos, Kath? 12 to 15 photos for a double page spread?
Yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, my colleague's over in the corner. She slept in this morning, so she's busy trying to make out she's working. Yeah, so look, that's a general rule, about half a dozen photos on a page, about a dozen over the 2 pages. And sometimes, like NAIDOC, in our current edition, we had about 6 pages of NAIDOC reporting, but we'll probably do another 4 or 5 in the next edition because there's so much happening around the place. And the reality is you can't cover everything, so you just try and give a snapshot of what's happening around the place.
Yeah. And with publishing, especially for Young Mob, do you guys do anything like protection wise on the platforms to go like prevent bullying and racism? Like, is there any comment policy / moderation?
Yeah, we have one of our journos, Nick. He keeps a bit of an oversight on our socials. So he loads up stories to, he's even doing TikTok these days, don't know why. He's doing TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, things like that. He keeps a watch over any commentary which goes on, and he'll knock out. Yeah, it's hard, as you can imagine, things will always slip through, but we do try and keep, we see anything racist or bullying, they're out, they're blocked. We don't want that in any of our forums. In our newspaper, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, people can't log on and give you a thumbs down, can they, on the newspaper? They can just rip it up and wipe their bum on it. I don't know what they do. Give it to the budgie.
Yeah, okay. And I remember you mentioned the cadetship as well before. Could you tell us a bit more about that, like how to apply and what it involves? Sure.
So the cadetship, we're hoping to have somebody lined up by the end of this month. We are looking for somebody who would like to come and move to Lismore, obviously, and be part of our main office, because then they can learn from us how we like to do things. The cadetship would be, you'd be, whatever your experience with us, you'd be starting from scratch. We'd be teaching you how to take a media release and transform it into a little news story. We'd teach you how to pursue a news story. We teach you how we like captions done. Just all the basics as we go along. Nick, who's the guy that I just mentioned before, he started his cadetship here. He's been here for a couple of years now, so we'd consider him. He's very solid as a reporter. He knows how to take his photos. He knows how to get his captions. Hopefully he's moving back to the main office within about 6 months, and we'll take him on to the next level, which is teaching him how to take those photos and stories and design them onto a paper or onto a page and end up in the paper. So it's like it's a staged approach. The cadetship, I think, it's actually, there's some funding available. And look, I haven't got the details. I don't know what the pay is at the moment. It'd be pretty good, I can imagine. You know, they're not going to attract people if they're just going to offer them crap wages and shit. But no, Koori Mail looks after its staff. In fact, probably my best employer that I've had over my career. And I've worked with a number of different publishers. So yeah. For more information, I'd get in touch with, actually, I think we had, look, I tell you what, how about after this, I'll get a link so that if anybody's interested, they can check out a link to what we're offering here.
That'd be
That's it?
definitely.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Oh, definitely. And with stories being published up to 2 months after pitching, what are some examples of timeless stories / content that you publish?
Yeah, sure. If you decide to do a story on, oh geez, I don't know, as long as it hasn't got a date, a date that it has to be published by. If you're promoting an event that's going to happen in 2 weeks, then obviously it's no use running that story a week after it's happened. If you want to do a story on what it's like to be, a circus performer and walk on the tightrope or whatever, well, that story's timeless. It can run at any time. And we will quite often lay out pages with a story and then decide closer to publication that, hey, wait a minute, we need those pages for this other thing, which is a little bit more time sensitive. So we might pull those pages, stick them to the side, run the news story, and then in the next edition, we got 2 pages ready to go. So we like to keep a few stories up our sleeve. And as I said, they are simply the ones where there's not an imperative for it to happen by a certain time. And that's usually because you're promoting an event and also like it's no use running a story on, say, NAIDOC week 2 months later. I mean, what's the point? You may as well just hold it till next year. But yeah, so that's the basic answer.
Yeah. And how much editing / producing support could your team offer once or if pitches are accepted? Like, is there any support?
Yeah, totally. I talk to our correspondents regularly, when they're any questions that they've got about stories, or if I think that they need to cover something, then it's just a 2-way conversation. The same as we receive stories. I've got a fella at the moment, his nickname's Duck. Duck's always been a broadcast journalist. He's very good on radio, but he's never had to really write his stories. But now we've got him getting around. He takes great photos and he's starting to write his stories. Now, they're coming in a little bit clunky and we're tightening them up. We're making them a little bit more active. And then at the end of that process, we're sending the finished product back to him so he can look at the one that he's submitted and the one that we've sort of, just tightened up. And that's part of his learning and he reads what we've done, and hopefully the next time he writes, some of those things stick with him. So yeah, look, we would rather have conversations about things and try and work out any little details prior to publication, because the thing with newspapers is it's very unforgiving. Once it's been published, there's no taking it back. There's no taking it back. The fact that you got somebody's name wrong or you got a date wrong or whatever. It's not like digital media where you have that luxury of just jumping online and making a correction. Once it's printed, that's it. So of course, there's pressure in all media, but there's a particular type of pressure with going to print. That once it goes to print, that's it, game over, baby. And whatever's there, you can be liable for legal problems if you haven't picked them up previously, or even just somebody ringing up and saying, how dare you call me such and such when my name is such and such. At the end of the day, though, mistakes happen, and you've got to be able to deal with that too. That's why we do have clarifications and corrections. So,
Yeah, ask that question, Darren. Is that something that Koori Mail does? Is it a standard practice to have to do a correction in the next paper? How does that work for you when you do get a
yeah,
call?
look, if we make a mistake and it's honestly our mistake, we will always run a correction. We will also endeavour to contact the person who is the subject of that mistake, if you like, just to apologise in person. You know, if you make a mistake, always own up to it. There's no point in not. It just breeds bad blood. So we got one in our current edition where we have a person. It's a lovely feature article on a person, and we start off with the right name, and then a little bit further down, the name changes. Now that was missed by the reporter, by myself subbing it, and by our proofreader. And sometimes, and page 6, yeah, Michelle goes to Melissa.
Well, then it's Michelle again.
Yeah, and then it's Michelle again. Now, this is the thing with newspapers. If you bugger it up, you bugger it up. You've got to wear it. And also, it's a tough thing because we all know how we read. Does everybody understand how when we read, we quite often, our brain will read the first letter and the last letter, and it skips along. Even for our proofreaders, our subs, we do our best. We do our best to pick up mistakes. And I could show you our proof pages where there's squiggles all over them. Our proofreader does an amazing job. He may pick up 1,000 mistakes in an edition. People only see the one that he missed. So, you know.
Always the way, eh?
Look, newspapers, it's a tough mistress, I tell you, but it's what we've chosen to do. Keeps us all in a state of anxiety and panic. But
Victoria and Blair, at any point, if you have any yarns or
oh yeah, sorry guys, I see you down the end there.
Yeah, they're definitely. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat or put the emoji hand up if you want to ask it out loud. I also had just a follow-up question on something you touched on there with, you know, having to ring up and apologise if there is that mistake. That is an honest mistake. You've got to wear it. What else do you do in terms of, or what are some of the important ways you nurture your contacts? And why is that such an important practice when you tell stories more than once with people and communities?
Look, that's contacts is probably the key to being a good reporter, is nurturing your contacts and respecting your contacts. And yeah, you're always having conversations with your contacts. Just because somebody says something doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying it for you to print it. You've always got to be really clear, always clear with your contacts about what's a quote and what's just general background in your conversations, because quite often people won't talk to you if they think that you're going to quote everything they say. And if you're going to record them, let them know that you're recording them. Never do it without them knowing, because that would be really, really unethical. You know, as a reporter, you can always say to the person you're talking to, that, look, you know, I'd like to talk about this particular subject. And if they say, yeah, I'd like to, but I don't want to be quoted on that, that's okay. You say, right, okay, this is for background or off the record. You've always got to respect your sources, because if you treat them badly or do the wrong thing by them, they're never going to tell you a bloody thing again. So yeah, you've just got to have an honest dialogue with your sources, and if it's something, if they're telling you things which could put themselves in a situation which is not a good situation or could impact on their workplace or their work or whatever, and that you've got to remember that you know, if they work at the local hospital, for example, and they tell you down at the pub that, oh geez, you know, we had a bad case the other day, a little kid come in and doctor missed the fact that they were having a whatever, and they, you know, they ended up, you know, not a good outcome. Well, you can tell that story, but if you said, oh, such and such from the maternity department told me that, well, that person's going to get in big trouble, aren't they? But it doesn't mean that you can't tell the story. You just look at different ways to access, to confirm that information. And you always protect the identity of your sources unless they give you permission to be identified. So that's, yeah, I think you sort of learn all that in Journalism 101 in your first week almost. Just always protect your sources.
It's a really good reminder.
But for us, saying that, we don't generally deal with the type of stories where we would have to worry too much about that. You know, it'd be nice if the Koori Mail had the resources to be able to really dig deep into some issues, but quite frankly, we just haven't. You know, some of the bigger newspaper companies do have the resources, but it doesn't mean that we can't break stories. You know, harder stories. It's just they might take a little bit more time to put together.
Something I thought of as well while you're talking is, in addition to you know, managing that relationship with your sources, being really clear about what you're when you're recording them and what you're publishing from them, but also how do you manage expectations about what the storytelling is going to do? Because this is something that I faced in my early career as a young reporter, telling a lot of social justice yarns, meeting often pretty vulnerable people in community who might believe that your reporting or storytelling is going to do something that it just can't. So yeah, like child protection yarns and having family members quite hopeful that it might result in, you know, a return of a child home. How do you manage that, the expectations of what you can do with your story?
Yeah, so you be realistic in what you can and can't do. So if somebody rings us and they want to talk about a particular child protection case or a particular native title case where there's a number of different claim groups or whatever, or some are recognised and others and that, these are topics we do not touch. And we're straight up with people. Look, I'm sorry, we hear you and we empathise with you, but it's not a story that we can touch. For the child protection stuff, a lot of that's by law. We can't identify children. We can't. But that's not saying that you can't do a story covering those topics in a more broader way, which aren't necessarily identifying particular cases. Because if somebody rings you up and they said, you know, my granddaughter's just been taken away from the mum and, you know, put in an institution and that, and it all sounds shocking, but unless you can get the full story, we can't touch it, because there may be a legitimate reason why that child's been removed. And although we empathise with the fact that, you know, everyone's heart's going to be heartbroken when a child's removed or whatever, to actually go into each particular case, it's beyond our scope of operation. So that's why when I started, I said the type of stories we concentrate on are more the ones which build people up in, you know, positive stories, positive role model stories, rather than getting down to the nitty gritty of particular cases, because, and you can imagine, especially in child protection, there is just so many cases out there that you can only look at it from you know, what's happening within the system rather than what's happening on individual case levels. I mean, if you had a year or 6 months to really drill down into these cases, yeah, you could put together a Walkley award-winning story every time, but just resources and time constraints means that we haven't got the luxury to cover those sort of stories.
Yeah, it's really important to know that, yeah, what the limitations are. And
yeah.
especially when you're approaching people, or when people approach you with a story, just being very clear up front.
Yeah. And also sometimes, like we've one of our staff members been, and it's for a couple of months, been talking to people about housing, right, and problems in certain areas further down south with housing, and we haven't quite found a way to do that story up until this point. Next week, somebody here in Lismore has called a meeting about Aboriginal housing, which means that all the work which has been done back here can maybe be brought forward to here, because we've got a hook into the story. You know, somebody in Lismore has called a meeting about housing. Meanwhile, here and here and here are things that are happening. So do you get what I mean? Like, just because you're talking to somebody, taking notes, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be writing a story straight away, but it's going into your bank. You may use it for a story a little bit down the track. So it's, yeah, it's all a bit dynamic at times.
Especially with those topics like housing and health and that, which are always going to come back into the news cycle.
Exactly. They're always out there, and it's a matter of like, okay, well, when's a good time to actually come out with our version of this? Or suddenly, sometimes you just stumble, like, something comes across. It could be a phone call, it could be what seems to be a fairly, sort of obtuse media email or something, and suddenly it could be a story. Which I remember a few years ago, somebody sent an email to me about how they were upset. They were upset that they'd been sent an invoice because for using an Aboriginal flag in their design on a T-shirt or something. And I'm like, it sounds like a bit weird. But that led on to that story about how the Aboriginal flag was a privately owned thing, and it was
And that was
all around Australia.
Yeah.
The story went all around Australia, got picked up all media. But that was literally just from some obscure little message that we got here at the Koori Mail, which hardly even mentioned the flag, really. It was more about, anyway, continue.
Yeah, that's a really good example, because the cease and desist letters just ended up, ballooning.
Yeah. Come out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. But then once you start to you dig deep or do a little bit of research, and you think, wait a minute, who actually knows about this? Who knows that there's a private individual who's making a lot of money out of what we all thought was a national flag? And not only the creator, but a Gold Coast-based company of white fellas who are absolutely raking in a mozza off the Aboriginal flag design,
It's big. And that yarn, like, Koori Mail really did lead the way in some of that reporting.
And it all sort of got resolved in the end. I think government paid off, paid a lot of money to try and come up with it. But I think it's still a shitty situation. But anyway, anything from the fellas down the end there? Where are you guys from? Victory and Blair.
You want to go?
I'm a Dungutty boy, so from Kempsey originally, but I'm living in Newcastle, or what we call country now, while I study at the uni there.
Okay, cool. What are you studying?
I'm studying a double degree of development studies and communication.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to do?
Journalism correspondent.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, stay in touch.
Thanks.
And what about you, Victory?
I grew up on the border, Albury-Wodonga way, and then slowly my way down further south, to be honest.
Which side of the border?
Victoria.
That's okay. The good side.
Yeah, the good side. And then work in community services at the moment.
Cool. And have you got an interest in journalism, obviously, or you wouldn't be here?
Yeah, I wouldn't be here. No, I think, that's just the way we go with storytelling as mob, as people. And that comes in all forms of media. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I should mention that while our cadetship is focused on the newspaper, we also have almost a brand spanking new podcast studio, which has been built here at the Koori Mail. We had started to do podcasts before the big flood, and we've put it on hold for now. I only just started to do a few recently, but part of the business plan here at the Koori Mail is to expand from the newspaper to become a little bit more multimedia. So we're using the social media a lot more. We will be upping our podcasting again. So anybody coming to join the team here, it's, yes, our focus is on producing newspapers. And a lot of people might think, oh, but that's a bit of a dinosaur industry. Well, the skills that you learn doing it aren't dinosaurs. You know, it's all about accuracy, ethics, you know, all the things which will make you a good reporter, whether or not you choose radio, television, podcasting, whatever medium you decide. You can't get better training as a journalist than in a newspaper newsroom, I believe. But then I'm a newspaper guy. But the actual the training that goes into, you know, writing is going to help your career whichever way you go. You know, even if you decide to go off into the corporate world and get into public relations or things like that, the actual writing techniques, etc., that we teach or that we learn and practice, they're invaluable wherever you go. So I'd just like to make that point that it's not just newspapers, but that is our core. But we also, there's opportunity for podcasting, for all sorts of digital media and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome, Dara, because I think you hit the nail on the head with the grounding that you get writing for a newspaper. And even that thing you mentioned earlier about, you know, not being able to edit the newspaper once it's published, it really does drive you to write quite carefully, to be very clear about what your message and storytelling. In the digital world, we can easily edit, you know. I think that's a really powerful way to strengthen your work as you go through. And with the podcasting, is that going to be something that's running while the cadetship's going? Like they're going to be...
Yeah, look, it is starting to pick up again. I know that just recently there's been a few podcasts produced, not from us editorial. I think they're more, Naomi, our general manager, has been having a few conversations with people, and they've all been recorded in a podcast just recently. But yeah, look, podcasting's still new for us. We've got to work out where we're going. In fact, if anybody's got a particular interest in that area, bring it in. You know, we're not the font of all knowledge here. The more people on our team who have, you know, good at different things, the better we get as a team. So yeah, solid. That's really cool. If anyone had any podcast ideas, they could potentially just pitch it out. Oh, totally. Yep, totally.
Cool. Well, look, I reckon we'll wrap up. Victory and Blair, do you have any other yarns or questions you want to share? Good.
Okay, guys. Good luck with, I hope I've been some help, but yeah, good luck with this program you're doing. And I'll pass on to Rachel some of the details about our cadetship. If it's no interest to you, it may be of interest to somebody you know. So maybe if we can just try and get it out there, because we're pretty keen to, you know, to get another person on board. And if that works out, we might be looking at getting another person on top of that. So really sort of starting to expand our newsroom.
That's great. Any jobs that you have, the cadetship and anything else that comes out, we'll share in our weekly email.
That'd be great. No worries.
All right. Thanks, Darren. You're a legend.
Thank you.
Okay, Rach. Yeah, nice to meet you all. And hopefully I'll see your names in print one day.
Today. All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.
So just to begin, I'm Rachel. I'm here on Gadigal land in so-called Sydney. Victory and Blair, if you want to write your name, your mob, and where you're coming in from in the chat. To kick us off, maybe Travis, you can go, introduce yourself, and then Ben, introduce yourself, talk a bit about Awesome Black and Staunch, and then we'll have a few questions for you.
Cool. I'm Travis. I'm Milleroi Darug. I was born in Muswellbrook on Wanneroo country, and live now on Wanneroo / Awabakal, but trying to move back down to Sydney. I've been a very multidisciplinary artist over a number of years, starting back in high school, and did fine arts at uni, became a dancer, danced for Bangara, became a producer at the Opera House, started going solo and making my own work, did a bunch of art shows, a bunch of writing, and then started a podcast and then started Awesome Black. That's me.
Thanks, Travis. And Ben, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. Obviously, I'm Ben. I'm Wiradjuri, man. I live on Bidjigal land, which is here in so-called Sydney as well. And yeah, I'm the head of gaming and kind of like a partnerships lead at Awesome Black. I worked in tech for over 20 years. So I started back in 2000. And that was very interesting. Did a lot of things, worked my way through technology careers and doing different things like being an engineer and being an architect, or what, an IT architect, not a building architect, and then managing people. But then I moved out of tech because it was just very, very challenging. And I was the CEO of Indigitech, which is a not-for-profit that helps get more mob into tech careers. So I did that for like 18 months. And then I left Indigitech and came over to Awesome Black. And what I do here is much more creative side stuff. So this is less of me doing like this tech career that I was in, and doing more ridiculous stuff like Chicken Soul Bays, Dungeons and Dragons, writing, game development, narrative work, lots of creative things that I really, really enjoy. And yeah, I think that's probably it. I can't really talk much more about that other stuff, but yeah, yet.
Deadly, I didn't know you had a gaming producer. That's mad. That's common interest in the group we have too. So probably pick your brain more about it in a sec.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. It's a new thing since the start of this year. It's very, very fresh, the area that we're moving into.
Something a lot of mob are interested in too. That's mad. So kick us off, maybe talk about some of the stories that your platforms are really interested in publishing. And I thought it'd be good to differentiate what makes an Awesome Black yarn and what makes a Staunch yarn.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's probably easier to define Staunch first, because it's a very specific outlet and platform. So Staunch is our political imprint that is all about championing strong positions from First Nations voices on Black ideology, Black thought, Black politics, Black ways of living in the colony and rebelling against the colony. And then comparatively, Awesome Black is a much more open space for content and for writing and different things. So Awesome Black as sort of a branded space can be a lot of different things. It can be pop culture, it can be gaming, it can be like chatty conversations between people on a podcast. It can be a poetry night or an art exhibition. So there's Awesome Blacks kind of can be a big amorphous beast that can change depending on, I guess, what the audience is at the time. But we have some sort of specific verticals under Awesome Black. So we do music articles each month, which are around a program that we run with Amazon Music. So we curate a playlist for them each month, and we write articles reviewing and talking about the curation of the playlist, and reviewing the songs and artists making that music. But we also might go out and see a live show and review that, or even talk about an album. So there's that sort of space. And then like we have Frontier War Stories on as a podcast, and a number of other podcasts that are independent shows but go out under Awesome Black. So it's a much more open sort of forum for Black fellas making cool content is basically the remit. Yeah, in terms of writing and storytelling, Awesome Black is sort of open for pitches from any Black fella about anything that is sort of interesting for a younger crowd. I would say, like, definitely pop culture. I would say like junkie or pedestrian TV, but by Black fellas. The Awesome Black audience isn't necessarily just Black fellas. It's probably a mix of white folks as well. And then same with Staunch, although Staunch is aimed to be written just for Black fellas, or those people who have moved from being an ally to being someone who will hold a Molotov cocktail and throw it at a police car.
Know your audience, that's solid. Ben, did you have anything else to add to that?
It's fun. I think lately, something that's kind of stood out a little bit about the Awesome Black, again, with the content that Trav was talking about, I don't think it ever really, its remit ever was like, hey, let's be entertaining. But entertaining is certainly part of it. Like, I think that also helps sum it up a little bit. Like, it's not, it doesn't always have to be thought-provoking or challenging or, you know, piece of creativity. It can just be absolutely gammon and but still be like, still get a message across that there, you know, we don't always have to be in that sort of like, you know, very, very serious space all the time. We can have fun too, you know, like, and so I think that's kind of come out a little bit, I think, in the last few months as well, is that, you know, that we try to be a little bit more entertaining, I guess, or at least a little bit more silly. Maybe that, I think it's silly, but yeah, I think other people find it entertaining.
You can definitely see that on the content we put out on socials as well. So that it's tongue in cheek and
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And a lot of humor as well, which I think is like just really important for a Black platform, you know, celebrating that humor that Mob have.
Yeah, we have to not always be bogged down in like what people expect of us, which I think sometimes, personally, sometimes it can be. We expect you to give us these deep political, nuanced conversations, or you know, about the political lives that Black fellas live from the day they're born. Sometimes we just want to have fun. We just want to have a laugh and muck around and do something, you know, like that, and but also, you know, show that that's what it's about. So
Yeah, beautiful. Look, before I talk about like what makes a good pitch for your platform, often the first thing that you know, for first-time publishers, like people who haven't ever been published before, and Mob who are just entering into this space, just figuring out what makes a good story and where they get stories from is often that first barrier. So I was wondering, as writers, creators yourselves, what tips do you have for finding a good yarn to share? What do you read, watch? Where do you go to get story inspiration?
It's another good and big question. I think definitely write what you know and what your experience is, but also like thinking about what you're interested in and what you're passionate about. That, like, particularly around the content on Awesome Black, like that's that sort of is the vibe and the remit, is like the podcasts that we make and the content that we make and the writing that we do is all about like having a passion for something or or the theme that we're writing about or talking about. Like a lot of our podcasts sit into the sort of comedy vein, and it's like, it's not like punching down or punching up. It's like the comedy that we make like often doesn't have to punch anyone. Like it's just fun talking about various things that are happening or something that we're interested in. And I mean, like, that's how we started, like the music vertical was just like, yeah, we love all of this music, and like identified that as like, there is not enough spaces talking about blackfella music. I mean, since Deadly Vibe left years ago and like the Deadly Awards left, there's not enough places celebrating it. And so it's like, yeah, let's just talk about incredible Black artists every month making really cool music and G them up. And then like, I would say like both Ben and I write or sort of work in the fiction fantasy space in a way, because we are both very into video games, and I would say like a lot of our stuff has that genre fiction sort of element to it. And then Staunch, on the other hand, like is very much about, I would say, a frustration in political discourse regarding blackfella issues, and that like I am very much not negging these other like imprints and spaces like Koori Mail. I don't, it's a newspaper. I don't feel like it's the space for this deeper level of political thought. And then places like The Guardian and other places that do have editorial remit and analysis remit, they're run by white fellas. So they're not necessarily a space that a black fella writer can have a black fella writer to editor conversation in the same way that if they were having a conversation with a white editor and having to justify and educate and do kind of across a whole bunch of other barriers. So Staunch is very much the space for like finding a angle to talk about something that you are personally frustrated with in political discourse or black thought, or to put forward a new modality of political thought, which is saying that is that's a huge kind of thing to take on. Like, I don't imagine I would love to imagine that we could be writing blackfella Marx or blackfella like leftist literature or manifestos, because that is where we should be publishing it on Staunch to those audiences, or they should be in a newly published book. But like this could be the sort of staging ground to getting it to that space. And then like if you're attending protests or like that or movements, conversations with organizers and leaders in those spaces and storytellers, like that sort of stuff would be like an amazing sort of content for Staunch. Yeah, sorry, I like babbled.
That was brilliant, super informative. Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add to that in terms of where you get your story ideas from?
Yeah, I think Travis, kind of summed up pretty well. I think one of the interesting things for me personally has been that, it might be the the kind of or maybe not resurgence, but the popularity of nerddom has increased a lot in the last few years, and that being part of pop culture. So that's certainly made things, I guess, a little bit easier to kind of, and a bit more accepted to talk about, like as Trevor said, the fiction and things that we do. But I think that it's just don't be afraid to be around it. So if, like, again, I'll take examples. So, Dungeons and Dragons, for example, right? Super nerdy, right? When we're growing up as kids, that's satanic and all that stuff that you've seen, seeing here. But it was just sticking with that as a passion and an interest, right? For me personally, let's say, for example, finding people who were good people, not, some others, but, get a bit gammon, but playing and constantly writing and trying and practicing. Like, and it really is to that point, like, you're writing a D&D campaign, you're practicing the writing, you're practicing the pace, you're practicing all these different things that apply to, writing in other ways, and just constantly honing that craft, I think. So stay, as Trevor said, with your interest. If that's what your interest is and you really, really like it, really try and find that space. Sounds cliche to say don't give up, but it's not about not giving up. It's about just finding that space where you can kind of just flourish, keep practicing, and just keep trying, because it's never going to be right, and eventually it starts to kind of hit a bit of a stride, and you start to get you hone your craft type of thing, and then that's when I think part of the you're talking about there with getting your audience right, know your audience, who you're talking to about it. Don't be trying to pitch Dungeons and Dragons to someone who doesn't care, right? You're wasting your time. But then also you're going to start to not just get that pitch down, or like, hey, I'd like to write this story, I'd like to play this game, or could I potentially do a live stream for you or something like that. You're going to get much better at it, and it's just going to end up being a much more polished product. So find, when it comes to pitches, making sure you pitching to the right people too, in the right spaces, like, for example, not right, like, I wouldn't rock up to, use your example. I say, Koori, hey, Koori, we want to run Dungeons and Dragons campaign for you. They'll be like, whatever. But if I go to Wizards of the Coast, then, they're like, hey, let's, maybe let's go. So, but to get there, there is a little bit of that thing. And I guess one more thing I want to talk about there it's not so much inspiration, but it's just about the network. Like, there is a thing about networks. And so that's like talking to other writers, or like, being involved in these types of things, reaching out, asking for help. If you might have a question or something like that, like the networking side of things really is, and it sounds so simple. And for blackfellas, we know relationality and how networks and communities work. We know that, but outside of blackfellas, there's also this, other networking, and it's really important. Because even just a casual yarn could sometimes turn up to be a really great opportunity to pitch a story, or pitch a book, or pitch an article, or pitch an idea. And it might have just been a yarn over ordering coffee at the cafe or something like that. It could be something really simple. So yeah, that's really important.
Sorry, that would be the other thing I would mention. Like, Ben's writing some like video game reviews at the moment. And like, that's the other thing that can go on Awesome Black, like reviews of movies or stuff that you're watching. And like, we're open to those sort of pitches as well. Like, and those, I guess, like low stakes writing opportunities, I think, are a great way to sort of hone your craft really, and get a couple of rungs on the belt.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it's really nice to see more review work from blackfellas as well, which, it's a growing space, that critical engagement with art, rather than having whitefellas write about our art, In addition to that, you kind of touched on it a bit, Ben, but what are you looking for when you do get that first contact from a content creator or writer in the pitch? And what is the process once you get that pitch? Do you engage with it and try and help them strengthen it, or do you want it to be pretty solid when you first receive it?
I'll jump in on this one, Barmy. Barmy doesn't handle much of this stuff, but we actually have a really clear pitching process for creators that might want to put something on Awesome Black. Or pitch an idea to Awesome Black. So we have like a Google form that we get people to fill in, and it's just a series of 10 questions, and it's sort of geared towards the podcasting and content creating side of things, but it's very easy to sort of dual use it for writing stuff. But usually it's sort of like asking, one, who are you? We want to know who you are. What is the pitch, the thing that you would like to write about? Why do you want to write about it? And sort of what is your angle on that thing? Like, what is your take? We had a pitch a few months ago that was sort of just said, hi, I'm this person and I want to write about plants and native plants. And that was it. And I was like, how do I draw? Like, I need to draw out more information. So like more information in the pitch is always better. Like that, how you want to talk about the thing that you want to talk about and why people will want to read it from you, I think is super important to include. And then the other thing that we include in the sort of questionnaire, and this is specifically about like podcasts, is like, do you have some sort of early ideas of names or like themes that you want to cover long term, but also what help do you need to get this project happening? And specifically for podcasts, we're thinking like, oh, do you already have a microphone and technology, or do we need to try and, is that somewhere that we can support you in getting that equipment? Or do you need do you need some media contacts to go and see this show that you want to review? Or like, what are the things that you need to get this piece of content that you want to write up, or to get it together? Like, hey, I want to go to the Black Lives Matter rally in the US and cover it for Awesome Black. Okay, that would be a big ask, but like, if that was the ask, it would be very good to hear that that's the help that you need. Hey, I need some plane tickets and a traveling microphone.
That's wicked. It's really nice to hear, especially Black Orgs having these supports in place, that you're not expecting mob, especially first-time publishers, to come with everything ready to go. I think it's really deadly, especially in the podcasting space, because there are so many financial barriers.
Yeah, I mean, that we only know how to help if we get told how we need to help, and that's not necessarily just help from us. If we can find out what people need, then we can open up our phone book and make some calls and go, hey, we've got this young guy who wants to has this incredible idea, here it is, and hey, we just need 15K to cover some flights and a couple of weeks of comm and some spending money on the ground, and yeah, they're going to write this amazing art. Like, that is sort of like pie in the sky. Sometimes that happens, sometimes, most of the time it doesn't, but like, unless you ask, then we can't kind of pass on that ask.
I was going to say, you're giving me ideas for my next holiday. I'll just keep you up.
Oh, good.
Yarns in Europe, Travis. You got to send me then. I think Tallulah's got a couple questions too, if you want to go.
Yes, hello. So I thought I would ask, are you commissioning any stories at the moment? And are there any topics and stories in particular that you're keen for people to cover?
Yeah, we are open to commissioning all the time and are just open for pitches. In terms of like anything particular, obviously the voice is a I guess timely conversation issue that could be covered for either Staunch or Awesome Black. and whether or not you have a take on that, totally fine. Totally fine to not want to write about that as well. Definitely Black fellas doing incredible things. So Black fellas making great music, Black fellas making great movies or TV, and then working in those spaces, arts content. We have like that's the writing side of thing, and then like more on the content and podcasting side of things. I think like we're really interested in just out there cool ideas that aren't necessarily just like talking about blackfellas stuff. Like I had a silly idea for a podcast that I wanted to make that was basically like me as the host going out and spending time with people with their dogs or their cats and talking about like them through their pet and like getting to know different people. Like it could be fun things like that. I like it's figuring out how to make it interesting and engaging. But yeah, we're really like open to any of that sort of content. I would say like we don't really do investigative journalist style stuff. So like we wouldn't be looking for that sort of style of pitches, mainly because we do not have the resources to support that kind of work, because it does take a lot of infrastructure around it to support that sort of heavy hitting journalism.
So with that, would you take like first person and third person article styles, and like what would be like the average length for your stories for an article and a podcast as well?
Really good question. Nuts and bolts. So yes, first person or third person, analytical essays, reviews, self essays, and talking about like your experience at something. Always really like a lot of the writing on Awesome Black is first person, but happy for either style. Word count can be, it's interesting. Like it can be anything from something short, 300 to 500 words, or 800 to 1,000, to up to like a 3.5 to 5,000 word piece, and depending on where it fits. Like, I mean, we don't necessarily have the budget to pay someone for a 3,500, 5,000 word article every month, because that would like take a much more robust budget than we currently have. But like if it's a special one-off piece, then that like really needs that, then we'd definitely be open to hearing it about it. There was one more question in there, Tallulah, but I have.
Sorry, I just like ran them at you real quick. Like length for podcasts.
Podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really what suits the story for podcasts. One of the shows that I do, each episode is like tops out at 40 minutes. There's a lot of data that suggests that 20 to 25 minutes is the sweet spot for audiences. I don't believe that. I regularly enjoy listening to 1 to 1.5 hour shows. But also like with Reels and TikToks sort of being the medium of the day at the moment, we're very open to hearing like super short form content ideas as well. And short form podcasts. I had another podcast idea that I was working on a few years ago that just never ended up getting up, but it was called The Fast and the Curious. And it was a shallow dive on different topics every week that nothing would go over 4 minutes. So
That sounds sick.
yeah, it would be very fun to make. I still want to make it one day. But if someone wants to steal that idea and bring it back and package it up and go, hey, I want to make this, I would love to hear about it.
No, that sounds like a sick idea. I definitely agree with sweet spots being up to an hour and a half, because that's what I do with the podcast I listen to, because I like to settle in. But also short form can work for other things if you're not going to do a particularly deep dive into it. I guess sorry.
One of the things that we really try and focus on doing with podcast and articles at the moment is not thinking about the short form content till later, like not with it, we try and think about it at the same time. And so we will try and capture all of the podcasts that we do on video so it can be cut up for Reels and TikTok, so that it's all done in one go, and like you don't have to then think about promoting it later.
No, yeah, that's a good point. And I think, yeah, another question that I have would be, what protections does your platform have in place for young mob publishing, like from bullying and racism? Is there like comment policy, moderation? Because obviously young cop it.
So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation to have, and we do have moderation, and 3 people sort of manage our socials accounts and take care of the moderation of it. We also tend to have like comments turned on the articles unless a writer contributor doesn't want it turned on, and then we will just turn it off. And then the other thing that we have is that people are welcome to publish anonymously if they want. We definitely put forward that if you're going to write something hard-hitting, you should put your name to it. But if you don't feel like you want to, then we're happy to publish things anonymously or strip things of the information. And then we find with our platform, in any case, that because we are publishing as Awesome Black, even though we may name the contributor or the author of the piece, that because it's just going through our website platform and on our socials, we can like not tag the writer in it, and that it is a step removed from things. So if we get commentary on a piece, it doesn't necessarily have to go back to the writer, that we can just handle that and delete the comments or hide them, and no one ever has to hear about it.
That's great. I mean, like, it's obviously so hard because being small organizations and other stuff, you can't like moderate 24/7. So yeah, finding those creative ways to adapt around it, I think is really reassuring. Victor?
Yeah, and I think we really believe in putting the control of that in the hands of the writer to choose how much they want to be identified or they want to be involved in the promotion of stuff, because I mean, that's, people aren't really commenting on the articles themselves. It's if anything on the social media side of things.
I think it's something that we speak about a lot. We have a fair amount of conversations about, I guess you could call it safety, although we also have a lot of conversations around the definition of safety. And we've seen this in a number of different instances, right? Whether it be large public platforms that, you know, we've seen have issues and, you know, some of us have vocally called out about, or specific instances of things that we've run. So, you know, I'll give you an example is the Twitch community of streamers that we started at Indigitech. And I stopped that going ahead, or I kind of stopped it continuing, primarily because I could no longer guarantee the safety of those Indigenous content creators on that platform as a part of an organization. If they want to do it individually, like, I obviously can't, you know, that's their thing. But asking them to be a part of something bigger was very, very hard. And, you know, this was at a time when we saw, you know, things that you have to adapt to. So to give you an example, on Twitch, we saw a lot of this, these, I don't even want to call it bots, but it was basically hate storms. So it was like all of these people going into people of colors streams, whether it was, you know, First Nations people or African-American people or whatever, like just going into their streams, and then these bots would just spam with hate, just spam. They were calling it hate storms. And it was just becoming very unsafe environment. And so how do you adapt to that? It's very, very hard. So we're constantly thinking about like these different things, like how do you adapt to different ways of doing that? So, you know, there's a lot of policy stuff. There's also a lot of technical stuff you need to look at. Like, are we blocking bots from commenting on articles? Are we blocking this type of stuff and kind of adapting to it? But it's always really interesting conversation to have, because it's not that hate is changing necessarily, but sometimes the ways that we experience it are changing in that digital space. So we need to be very mindful of that going forward, especially.
Yeah, we tend to have in organization conversations and in community conversations about it a lot. And so like part of those conversations is, I guess, like supporting each other as a community, and like all of the people that work for Awesome Black and work with Awesome Black, like the door is open to have a conversation about it. If something is going on, like we are very open that we can't offer like counseling or mental health support, because that is not our expertise or remit, but like we can offer community friendship support side of things around this stuff. And like often our advice around it is to just like block and ignore is the best way, like to make it stop. Like don't give it air and it goes away. And like that approach has worked for us as in most cases, but yeah, and then in other cases, like we just sort of have other strategies in place, but we just sort of have an open conversation, open dialogue about if something's going on, let's nip it in the bud, or let's figure out what we need to do and what's best for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think it's really obvious that you think really deeply about this, and it probably has something to do with being blackfellas yourselves, but having editors who are from marginalised communities often do think really deeply about those comment policies, about how you moderate, because that's something you're exposed to as well. Thank you for sharing so much. Really grateful for you making the time. Blair and Victory, if you have any questions, just pop your little emoji hand up or cut me off. You're welcome to jump in right now. But if not, give me a thumbs up and I'll move on. Yeah? Deadly. Anything that I haven't touched on, Travis and Ben, and anything that we haven't covered in this yarn that you think is really important for our Truth Our Way mob to know?
I would say like that, just kind of reiterating around the sort of the way Awesome Black works is there's sort of different levels of engagement that you can have with Awesome Black. Like you can pitch to us to sign up as a Awesome Black creator, and that means you become a part of our creator community. And we act as a sort of talent agency in that case, where we will publish your work as well, but also pitch you to other places. I'm trying to get our Discord kind of up and running again, but we currently like invite everyone into a like shared Slack channel where you can kind of be a part of the overall community of creators in that space. And yes, after you've gone through our Truth Our Way, if you're keen to reach out and be a part of that, we're happy to hear from you. And also there's a bunch of Facebook groups and other spaces. I mean, I don't use Facebook anymore, but there's the Writing While Black Facebook group. They're all like great spaces to be connected in. So if anyone's interested in any of that, happy to invite you along to things. Yeah.
It's awesome, Travis. Yeah, it's really good to like have all these different communities of mob creatives, spaces where you can yarn and get story ideas from, or even just bounce ideas off. Yeah. Anything from you, Ben, before I wrap us up?
I guess a couple of things. I think that, always looking forward, and I'm always involved in tech, but always looking forward in the digital spaces, right? And thinking about, there may be opportunities in the future that, you are looking at in other platforms. Let's say, for example, it could be vlogging, or it could be, in the metaverse, or it could be whatever's coming up, right? And all the buzzwords. But I think it's really important to again, when I come back to those networks, talking to different people, because there's different ways that these kind of spaces work. And the more that we work with partners, as Travis kind of said, being a part of it, we can help. But I think that's important just to ask if you ever even just got a question, right? Like, how does algorithm work on YouTube? How does algorithm work on TikTok? Like, it's different. They work differently, right? There's different ways to approach content plans for different platforms. And realistically, if you think, that could be a part of what you want to do. I want to release a content. I want to release it regularly. I need a content plan. But, there's other things there too, like rates and business support. And, we see this all the time, whether it be, artists, whether are you pitching to orgs? Are you writing? Are you pitching for a novel or an anthology, or, and I think that there's a lot of, again, it's kind of that networking stuff, a lot of strength just to say, ask mob. I think it's important that we have these yarns and work this stuff out. We've done a lot of that stuff, I think, right, Travis, with artists, like as in creative artists, and rates and things like that, whether it's working with the industry or working with the artists, right? Or even seeing a quote and going, nah, we can quadruple that, no problems, right? And then them going, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. Like, I didn't realize I could charge that much for my art. Well, okay, that's just part of, how we can all help each other. So I think that's it. Just, like, this program is really awesome, and you meet people, you meet different people, you all know each other, you meet each other, and then that can build going forward. I think that's really, really cool. And don't like undervalue that. There's so much value in it.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, and just add a little bit more around like with the creator program stuff and signing on as our like talent agency thing. If you don't want to sign on to that, like, we don't kind of open doors and then, like, we don't gatekeep. If you're like, oh, I got this idea, do you know anyone I could pitch it to? We'll just introduce you. Like, we're not here to gatekeep contacts from people. Like, that's we started Awesome Black, and then suddenly we're getting in the room with Spotify and Meta and all of these places, and it's like, yeah, this is cool. Let's get other Black fellas in here as well. Like, we want to be working with y'all.
Thank you both. You both touched on something that I think about a lot, which is the power of these spaces, of Black spaces, where we should feel really comfortable just sharing information with each other, especially around rates, especially around being paid properly, because that's how we make sure we're not getting ripped off. It's how we make sure we know our worth. And it's also a really good way to test our story ideas, like it's mob can be.
Yeah, one of Ben's friends had a question about rates recently that Ben couldn't answer, so he passed her on to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I was like, yep, cool, done. Like just we've each got expertise and knowledge in different areas. Like we all openly share it when we don't know something. Yeah,
that's so mad. And especially because there can be so, like, it's what you get paid across the industry with different media organizations it just varies so much these days. So having those yarns with Mob, knowing like what the base is, what you really should be minimum asking for is, it's really empowering, especially in those negotiations, the first time you run them yourself. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate taking the time, and we'll
Thanks
probably
very
talk over the next few weeks.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And Victoria and Blair, nice to meet you both. Sorry, didn't get to hear your voices or anything, but I'm sure we'll see you again in a few weeks or a few months at some point.
And if we get any questions afterwards as well from any of them, we'll flick them to you as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. I'm going to pause the recording here.